Hello, everyone, and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets, and drama. So, today I'm doing something a bit different because you can actually see me today. And I recently attended DragCon in the UK, and a lot of you had questions about it. So, I asked my audience, and you said that you would like to hear more about it, my experience, how it works, the cost, and maybe some backstage tea if there is any. So, I thought I'd make this little video talking about DragCon, explaining how it works and whether it is worth it. So let's get started. So first of all, I would just like to say that I went to DragCon UK in London, and I've not been to the one in LA or America. So this is only based on my experience in the UK one. And the other thing to note is I was a bit of an idiot and I didn't take enough videos and photos. So I have some, but I will also be using some photos and videos from other people who I know were there, and I'll put their name underneath so you know where it came from. So just to give, first of all, a rough explanation of how DragCon works. So it happens over 3 days, and usually, so it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The way it works basically is you pay for a ticket, you can decide which day, how many days you go for, and each queen has a booth. Some are different sizes, but most of the booths are of the same sort of size. And if you want to actually speak to the queen, have a picture with them, that's what's called a meet and greet. And for the meet and greet, there is usually a minimum spend, and the queens will be selling merchandise, and you have to spend a minimum amount to get the picture and the meet and greet with them. So yes, you do have to pay to meet the queens. That was one of the questions that a lot of you had. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And the other thing you can do at DragCon is that there's a main stage where they do performances. So most queens do a performance that's usually about 10 minutes long, maybe 20 minutes, something usually like a lip sync or some sort of DJ set, something like that. Plus, there's also talks, conferences, and other sort of entertainment and things that you can do. But the main attraction are the booths with the queens in them. So now that we've talked just roughly about how it works, I'll just go into some of the elements in a bit more detail. I will also say, first of all, so I had a slightly different experience because I had a guest pass, which gave me backstage access. So my experience was slightly different to what a regular ticket holder would have, but I will explain some of the differences as well. So in terms of the days, there are 3 days, like I said, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I only went on the Friday, but you can choose, you can buy a ticket for just one day or you can buy a ticket for all of the days. The way that the tickets worked for the UK was that it was about 50 to 60 pounds for a regular ticket, which is about 70 to $80. And then the VIP tickets were a bit more. So the VIP ticket was you got earlier access. So you got to go in an hour before everyone else, so the regular ticket holders. The entry times were normally 10 for the general public, for normal ticket holders, but the VIPs could get in at 9 a.m., so an hour earlier, and then it ends around 6 p.m. And the other benefit of the VIP ticket is on each queen's booth, usually there's a line for the regular ticket holders and then a line for the VIP ticket holders. And that means that you can basically get to do the meet and greet a bit quicker because there's a separate line, a little bit like when you go to Disneyland or something like that, and they have sort of the fast lane. That's effectively what it is. And in terms of which day to go, I only went on the Friday, but I will say that Friday was the day I chose because they do what's called the Queen Walk on the pink carpet, which is when basically each queen, they announce them and they walk down and everyone's watching and they're cheering. And it's nice because you get to see the queens basically do a runway. And that only happens on the Friday. I chose to go on Friday also because apparently it's one of the quieter days. Saturday tends to be the busiest day because it's a weekend. And I also heard that Sunday was a little bit busier than Friday, but certainly a lot less busy than Saturday, which is the main day. I also heard that apparently on the Sunday, because a lot of the queens, it's the last day, a lot of them were discounting some of their merchandise, and they were being a bit more sort of free with the meet and greets or walking around and taking pictures with people if there was no one waiting at their booth. That's just what I've heard. I didn't experience that, but So apparently Sunday might be a day, if you want to maybe get some discounted stuff, Sunday might be the day to go. But the Queen Walk was the main reason I decided to go on Friday. It's a really cool event and you get to see all the queens, and it's just a really nice atmosphere because everyone's cheering and you get to see all of their different outfits, because sometimes the queens wear a different outfit just for the pink carpet walk, and then they'll change for the rest of the day. You get to see the most extravagant outfits in that pink carpet walk, and then quite often the queens will change into something a little bit more comfortable for the rest of the day. So in terms of what I think the main thing that people want to know about is the cost. So like I said, the cost obviously is the tickets, and that can range anywhere from, let's say, £50, which is about $60, up until, if you want a weekend ticket, I think it was more like £150, which is maybe, let's say, about 100 and up to about $100, $150, $60. So it really depends on how long you want to go for and whether you want to go VIP or just regular ticket. The other main cost is obviously if you want to do the meet and greets. So the way it works is you go up to each queen's booth and there'll be a line that you have to wait in. I would say the line in terms of how long you have to wait really depends on the queen. Some queens had very long lines, especially if maybe they're better known queens. They were on an American season because they tend to be the ones that more people know. They have the longest lines. And then a lot of the other people had no lines or maybe just one or two people. I would say in general, I got in early along with the VIP people, so at 9, which was an hour before general entry. And I managed to get round about 7 or 8 queens within an hour. So there was basically no line. I just got straight to see the queen. Maybe I was waiting a minute or two, but that was about it. I think once general admission happens and everyone goes in, you can probably expect to wait anywhere from 5 or 10 minutes up until I did wait for about 40 minutes for one of the queens that had a very long line. And in terms of the cost, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to do what's called a meet and greet with the queen, which is basically when you get to spend a few minutes talking to them, usually maybe 1 or 2 minutes, then you have to get a meet and greet. Each queen had a price list on their booth and they were selling merchandise. The merchandise is usually something like t-shirts, tote bags, printed photos that they'll sign, and then maybe key rings or something like that. It really depends. Each queen was doing something slightly different. And there was a minimum cost for the meet and greet. So once you have bought enough merchandise to reach the minimum spend, you get to do the meet and greet, meet the queen and take the pictures. The minimum spend on most of the queens, I would say, was somewhere between 10 to 15, maybe up to £20. So let's say that's somewhere around 18, 20, maybe $25. Depends on each queen. I think they choose their own pricing, but I would say on average, it was about 15 to £20 for a meet and greet with the queen. So really how much you spend will depend on how many queens you actually want to meet. For me, my priority was to meet the queens who I had done interviews with and who I knew a little bit, because I thought it'd be nice to meet them in person. So I went and met all of those people first. And then afterwards, there were a few other people I wanted to meet. And I created a list and what booth they were at and what time they were performing. And I think you do need to be a bit strategic about that, because especially if it's the Saturday when it's the busiest day. I know that some people said they were waiting a long time for the meet and greets, so they had to be strategic about which queen they went to go and see first. So I'll put up some pictures while I'm talking of the different queens that I met. But I had a really lovely experience with all of the queens. They were all so nice, and it was really lovely to get to meet them in person. Each queen was slightly different in terms of what they were offering, the merchandise and the way they did the meet and greet. But most of them, it was you say hello, you talk for a little bit. Some people take an extra time to really speak to you, obviously, which means that the line is maybe a bit longer, but it means that you get to speak to the queen for a bit longer. And then they'll usually do a photo and you can ask them to sign something, with a personalized message. And you just get I would say on average, 5 minutes maybe with the queen, maybe a bit less. But that was generally how the meet and greets work. And one thing to note about the meet and greets, and they did have signs about this up throughout DragCon, but it was basically saying, so firstly, drag is not consent, i.e. just because someone's in drag doesn't mean that you can touch them without their permission or grab them or do something like that. The other things that definitely you don't do are ask for freebies. I expected to pay for all of the queens when I went up, even if I knew them, because they have to spend money to go to DragCon and it's a big investment for them. And this is how they make money. So you need to be willing to spend money. In terms of how the actual room or the conference center itself is set up, the one in London was at the XL, which is a big conference center. And it's a huge building. Kind of looks a bit like an airport hangar. And the way that this DragCon UK 2023 was set up there were 5 different sort of aisles, I guess you would call them. The main one in the middle was called Glamazon Boulevard, and it had the pink carpet on it. And that was where they had booths, but they were the booths more for trade. So people that were selling jewelry and wigs, but not for the actual queens themselves. It was more for buying actual products. And then they had 4 actual aisles with the queens in them. And the aisles were called things like Catwalk Boulevard, Death Drop Alley, Penny Lane, and Sickening Street. And like I said earlier, each queen's booth can vary in size. There was a standard size, and then there were also double-sized booths for some of them, like the winners or some of the more well-known queens. And also some queens were sharing as well. So 2 queens might share a booth. There was also the main stage, which is just at the end, and it was just a big stage, and you don't have to book tickets to see particular shows. You can just stand and wait, and many queens will go up, and it's usually about 10 to 20 minutes long, and each queen will go up and they'll do some sort of performance. So, for example, I watched one of the performances, which was Chaos from Canada's Drag Race. And they just did a really cool lip sync number. But there's also things like RuPaul does a DJ set for a little bit, and they invite people to come up and dance on stage. And other times it's just queens maybe doing a spoken word lip sync or a regular lip sync or some sort of dance number. There's also mini booths throughout. There's one big stage where they were doing talks/interviews, I guess, with the queens. And I saw one which was Utica talking to Crystal from UK. And they were just discussing how they got into drag and things like that. And there's other ones where people discuss sort of topics about drag or drag race, their experiences as well. So you can just go up and watch those. You don't have to book those. Some people were asking about payment as well. So in terms of DragCon UK, it was a mix. Some people were accepting cash only, especially international queens, I think, because obviously different currency. So definitely take some cash with you. I paid probably 30% in cash, and then the rest of the time by credit card. Most queens had a card machine, so you could pay by card if you wanted to. Others were doing things like PayPal or Venmo, one of these sort of apps, but most of them at least accepted cash at a minimum, and then some accepted card and other payment methods. And someone else actually asked about the food options, which is a very good question. So yeah, they did have food options. I got a burger, a fried chicken burger. They didn't seem to have that many options that I saw. They had a few, I would say, more snack places where you could buy coffee, drinks, beer, and other alcohol, things like that, as well as maybe some crisps, some nuts, a sandwich. There wasn't like a big food hall or anything like that inside. There were just only a few food options, and most of them were card-only payments, but that might differ depending on what country you're in. But I just went for the chicken burger because it was the easiest option. There were also options outside, so you could walk out of DragCon and go back into the main building, the XL building, and there were some coffee shops and sort of restaurant areas in there as well. And obviously, as long as you've got your pass, you can just go straight in and out. It doesn't matter. What I will say is that for the food options, I couldn't really see any seats or chairs that you could sit down and eat. There were just these food stands, I guess, or food, almost like a food truck inside, but there was nowhere to sit around them. So I basically had to just sit on the floor and eat. So that was a little bit strange. I don't know, maybe it's different in other venues in different countries, but yeah, for me, I just had to sit on the floor and eat my burger. Some of you asked actually what it's like for the queens to actually go. So from the queens that I know, obviously, you might guess this, the queens have to pay to have their booth. And I don't know the exact costs, but it can be anywhere from hundreds to thousands of dollars for it, because depending on how big your booth is. So that's obviously something to consider. And that's why you have to pay for the meet and greets, because the queens have already probably paid a lot of money for the booth. They have to decorate the booth themselves. So that's why the booths all look different. Some of them had more elaborate decorations than others. The queens also have to pay for things like Wi-Fi, carpeting, anything, literally anything that's on the booth, plus all of their merchandise. They have to pay, obviously, to have it printed. And then they also have to pay, obviously, for travel and accommodation if they're coming from overseas. So that's just something to consider. And I know that some of the queens, for example, posted on Instagram saying that they had to go to IKEA to get some furniture and things like that, because I don't think much gets provided by the venue. I think pretty much everything, apart from the shell of the booth itself, everything else has to be provided by the queens. And it's also, this has been said, I think, online quite a lot, and I have it on good authority, that some of the queens, or at least the winners, are contractually obliged to be at DragCon. And so that's also just something to bear in mind, that some of the queens will be contractually obliged to be there, which it doesn't mean that they don't want to be there. So it does mean that it's a financial obligation for them to be there, and they don't necessarily have a choice in the matter. But I think they still enjoy their time there. But it's just something to consider, that especially the winners are probably contractually obliged to be there. And so the moment you might be waiting for, the backstage tea, I will just say, I don't really have any backstage tea, but just a few backstage things that might be interesting. So like I said, I did have a guest pass, which is slightly different, and that got me into the backstage areas. And it also meant that I got early entry. But one thing that I thought was quite just interesting that maybe people don't think about as much is that all of the performers, there's a backstage area, and I actually unknowingly went into the backstage area when I had just finished eating my lunch, my burger. I went to go to the bathroom, and I didn't go to the main one. I went to this other one. There was a sign saying bathroom, and I went to it, and there was a security guard on the door. And I thought it was just a normal bathroom, so I thought it was a bit unusual that there was a security guard. But the security guard said, "Oh yeah, you can use this bathroom if you want, because I can see you've got your guest pass." So I sort of just went in, and then I went upstairs. And what it was it's a backstage area for the queens, but it's quite small. It's effectively like a narrow corridor with some rooms going off it, and there were some bathrooms. I went into the bathroom, and it was just interesting because I think the queens didn't really have anywhere to change. So they were changing in the toilets because they didn't have a choice. So there were lots of performers going around, half in drag, half not, getting ready for their numbers in the toilets, changing. And obviously seeing the queens interact with each other, because there was obviously queens from multiple countries, franchises. And I didn't disturb anyone. I just went in, went out again, because I thought I wanted to be respectful and not, ask for a picture when someone's trying to get ready or whatever, because that's the backstage area. But it was just interesting to see the queens and sort of interacting with each other and getting ready. And it was just quite a cool experience to kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit. And I took a few photos from the backstage area, but I was taking the picture of the actual conference center. So just to give you an idea, there was this window where you could see the whole conference center. I'll show a photo, and that kind of gives you an idea, almost like a bird's eye view of what the actual center looked like, and the floor area where all the different booths were. And that area I talked about was where the queens sort of hung out between times. Someone actually asked whether you can take photos with the queens when they're not at their booth. The answer is no, really. I think obviously you're paying for the photos and the meet and greet with the queens. Most of the time when you see queens just walking around not at their booth, it's because they're going to and from the backstage area because they maybe have a break, or they're about to go on a performance and they need to change. And obviously you shouldn't disturb them because they're just trying to go from place to place. I would say if a queen is sort of standing there and inviting you to come up and speak to them, then it's fine. I know that some people said on the Sunday, because especially near the end of the day, it was the last day, some of the queens were being a bit more free and open about walking around and saying hello, and you could go up and take photos with them without paying. but you certainly shouldn't expect that. You should expect that you will have to go and pay for the meet and greet to take photos with the Queen. So moving on, I guess, to the main question of this video is DragCon worth it? So obviously there are pros and cons. The main con, let's start with the cons, is that obviously it's the expense. That's the biggest thing. So I think if you're going to DragCon, you can expect that you will probably have to pay hundreds of dollars, I think, if you're being realistic, not only for the tickets, but also for the meet and greets. Plus, if you're coming from out of town, you've got to pay for travel and accommodation. So you will be looking at hundreds of dollars, I would say, not just tens of dollars, if we're being realistic. But I think you've got to remember that the queens are paying for their booth to be there. And for them, it's also a big expense. But overall, I would say that the biggest pro is that you get to see the queens that you know and love from the show. For me, I got to meet the queens and it was so lovely getting to meet them in real life. And it was really nice because quite a few of them recognized me, which I wasn't expecting, especially some of the queens. Even though I didn't actually know them that well, maybe we've spoken on Instagram or something like that, quite a few of them recognized me, which was lovely. So I think that's a really nice element of it, that you get to meet the queens in person. But the performances on the main stage are free, and that's a really good opportunity to watch these world-class performers do a number for free, included in the ticket price. And that was a really cool element of it as well. I really enjoyed seeing the performances. For me, it was also a really cool networking opportunity to meet the queens, but also to actually meet you, my subscribers. I was really surprised that I did get recognized a couple of times, which was really nice. I got a few people sort of stopped me and said, "Oh, I love your channel." And we took some pictures and things. And that was really, really nice because I wasn't expecting to be recognized. So that was really cool. So thank you to everyone who came and said hello. I know some people messaged me afterwards and said that they were a bit too nervous to come up and say hi. But, you know, I'm a very nice person. I think I just have a resting sort of frowning concentration face sometimes. Maybe that was why. But yeah, if you ever see me around, just come say hi. I'm a nice person. I'd love to meet you all. So for me, I would say that DragCon was definitely worth it. It was so cool to meet all of these queens in person and to get to see them, to get to see their show, their booth, their creativity. And I've also got some really cool merch to show for it. I've got, you know, printed photos, and I've got some really cool other things that queens had. And I'll put up some pictures to sort of show some examples of what you can expect. And it's also great for, you know, memories. I got to meet some other content creators, and that's an opportunity to meet people who you wouldn't normally otherwise, because maybe they live in a different country or a different city. So it's just a really nice community that's all together for that one day or 3 days, whatever, to celebrate this amazing show that we all know and love. So there you go. I hope you found that helpful, and I hope that you have maybe learned something about DragCon that you didn't know before. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions or comments about DragCon. If you were at DragCon, let me know what your biggest takeaway was from it and whether you think it was worth it and why or why not. That's it for another video. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for more of these videos, and I'll be back with more Drag Race videos in the future. Thank you. Bye.